Here is another problem that one of our viewers had. They installed some type of a siding. I'm not going to name the product because this video could apply to a variety of different products. So let's go ahead and get started. The bottom of the siding usually needs to be at least a 1/2 inch minimum, but preferably 1 inch below the top of the building foundation to prevent water from leaking in between the bottom of the framing plates. So here's what the viewer is dealing with who requested more information on this. And they said that it's already leaking when it rains. What happens is the water comes down here, goes over here, up against the framing plate, and then some of it, not all of it, works its way into any gaps there are in the bottom of the framing plates. And trust me, there are plenty of gaps. I one time took a blower after I had drywalled and stuccoed the house, and I was blowing inside the house, and I looked out the window and some of the dust was blowing out of the bottom of the weep screed. And of course, you could always install a bead of caulking on the inside at the bottom of the framing plate where it meets the building foundation. But I don't know if that will work or be a long time fix. So my first suggestion, and only suggestion really for this type of repair, would be to slip some metal underneath the siding. And this, of course, would require you to remove the nails at the bottom of the siding. And this method here will allow any of the water that gets behind the siding and in front of the building moisture barrier or paper to roll onto the metal and down towards the ground or sidewalk, whatever you're dealing with. However, the easiest repair, and one that might not work the best, you're going to need to maintain this type of repair to make sure that the caulking or sealant, whatever you're using, is not separating and providing any gaps for water to roll into. And the caulking could be installed on the top and behind the board. So we would install some caulking on the siding or the back of the board and then slide the board into position while squishing the caulking to hopefully form a nice seal in between this board and the front of the siding. And then we could go ahead and run a bead of sealant or caulking on the top here. And I understand that this might be your only option. And trust me, if this is your only option, just make sure that you get a good sealant or caulking, maybe even use silicone, and that it is paintable caulking if you are going to paint it. Because this is going to basically be the do or die on this type of repair. The next suggested repair, and this isn't something I would be suggesting, but I think this is where the viewer was heading, and that would be to cut the bottom of the panel and install some type of a Z-bar flashing along with a board under it or even a strip of siding. And the biggest problem I have with this would be that when you cut the bottom of the panel siding or plywood siding, you're not going to be able to get the nailing into the bottom plate. That might be, or should I say most of the time, is required to create the lateral strength required by most structural engineers and local building authorities to prevent your building from falling over. And even though I don't think this problem would be solved completely by adding a block so that you could nail both pieces together to provide you with some type of a structural transfer from the panel to the bottom framing plate. So the engineering is going to be the biggest problem with this. As long as you install the flashing, you can see where the water is going to roll off of the siding onto the flashing and then onto the lower board. And if the bottom of the board is about a 1/2 inch or more from the bottom of the framing plate, you shouldn't have any more problems. However, let's go ahead and take a look at something that's going to work a little bit better, and that would be to install the metal behind the building paper. And this isn't going to be that difficult to do after you cut the panel, because there's a good chance you're going to be cutting the building paper. So try to get the flashing behind the paper and then install another piece of building paper or even some window flashing. And this would be the building paper that would go underneath the windows when they're being installed. It might be between 6 and 12 inches wide and might be easier to slip in between the back of the building paper and the front of the wall framing. And you're going to want it to lap at least 1 inch. However, if you can get it to go a little higher, do it. So something like this should be okay. because it's going to allow for any water that gets behind the siding and in front of the building paper to roll onto the flashing and then safely away from the building. So again, the only problem I'm going to have with this is the structural problem it could create from not being able to nail the bottom of a full piece of panel, plywood, or other panel type of siding to the bottom of the wall framing plates. So with all of that said, let's go back to my original idea. This is the one I would prefer. However, you would actually need to check with your local building authorities, building department, to validate the information in this video. And I know some people get tired of hearing me say that. But I don't want to be like other people on YouTube. I don't want to tell you that something will work in my area, but it won't work in your area. Something like this might not work in an area where it rains a lot or gets a lot of snow. So with something like this, you can see where any water that gets behind the siding is going to roll onto the metal flashing and hopefully safely away from the foundation to avoid going into your home.